Hi and welcome, I'm Andy Miocha and you are watching A News. Here are the headlines. EU foreign ministers meet in Luxembourg to discuss Ukraine and the Middle East. World leaders condemn missile attack on Ukraine's Sumy, which killed at least 35 people. Russia claims a targeted meeting of military officers. New tariffs on semiconductor chips coming soon, according to Donald Trump. Thank you for tuning in. European Union's foreign policy chief Kaja Kallas called for maximum pressure on Russia at the bloc's foreign ministers meeting in Luxembourg. The Middle East was also on the agenda, with the Foreign Affairs Council talking on new financial aid for the Palestinian Authority.
EU foreign ministers gathered in Luxembourg to discuss the conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, EU-Africa relations and the Western Balkans. Upon her arrival at the meeting, EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas called for maximum pressure on Russia to end its war in Ukraine, a day after a missile strike on the Ukrainian city of Sumy.
But right now, I think we have to put the pressure, the maximum pressure on Russia to really end this war, because it takes two to want peace. It only takes one to want war, and we see that Russia really wants war. And all those who want the killing to stop should put the maximum pressure on Russia.
Ministers were expected to discuss contributions to the so-called Kallas Plan, which involves spending €5 billion on 2 million rounds of large-caliber artillery ammunition this year. Hungarian Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó said that his country will not agree to any part of the European Union's military training mission to take place inside Ukraine. Hungary will also oppose any sanctions on Russian energy imports, Szijjártó added.
For us, this is a red line. No element of this military training mission should take place on Ukrainian territory. We do not want the European Union to send military trainers or military advisors to Kyiv, as this presents a serious danger in terms of escalating the war.
The first ever EU-Palestinian Authority high-level dialogue will take place after the Foreign Affairs Summit. At the summit, the European Union is expected to announce a 3-year financial support package for the Palestinian Authority worth around €1.6 billion, $1.8 billion, according to the European Commissioner for the Middle East.
The death toll from the Russian missile attack on the Ukrainian city of Sumy has risen to 35, local prosecutors say. Another 117 people were wounded in the deadliest strike on Ukraine this year, according to officials. Several Ukrainian cities have declared a 3-day mourning. World leaders have condemned the attack, while Russia says it targeted a meeting of military officers.
Ukrainian officials confirm 35 people were killed and 117 others were wounded when 2 Russian ballistic missiles struck the city of Sumy on Sunday morning in the northeast of Ukraine. The strike happened on Palm Sunday, targeting the city centre. One struck a university building, while the second exploded in a nearby street. Footage released by Sumy's regional military administration shows fires consuming vehicles and bodies of the dead and wounded scattered in the streets. President Volodymyr Zelensky demanded a tough international response against Moscow.
The attack hit the center of the city on Palm Sunday. Only filthy scoundrels can act like this. Plus, wars end only when criminal wars are not forgotten and when there is a pressure on the aggressor. This is not happening now. Last Friday, 1 month had passed since Russia rejected the American proposal of a full, unconditional ceasefire. They feel no fear, and that's why there are missiles. That's why there are 100 combat drones each night, most of them Shaheds.
Western leaders responded swiftly. On social media, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called the strike barbaric. French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz also expressed their solidarity. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer mentioned on X that Putin must now agree to a full and immediate ceasefire without conditions. US President Donald Trump called it a terrible mistake. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres says he's deeply alarmed and shocked, condemning the act of targeting civilians, which is prohibited under international humanitarian law. Guterres says there needs to be a lasting ceasefire that upholds Ukraine's sovereignty and independence. Russia said 2 of its missiles had hit a meeting of Ukrainian and Western military officers.
We have facts of who was there at the facility which has been hit in Sumy. There was yet another mob up of the Ukrainian military commanders and their Western colleagues, disguised as mercenaries or I do not know what.
Ukrainian cities have declared a 3-day mourning for the victims. Flags will be lowered and all entertainment events have been cancelled as a mark of respect.
US President Donald Trump said Chinese-made smartphones and other electronics will not be exempt from tariffs, adding they're simply moving into a different levy bucket. This follows Friday's announcement that some of these products would be exempt of the tariffs of up to 145%. China has since called on Trump to completely cancel his tariffs regime. However, US officials said on Sunday that products would be subject to a semiconductor tariff instead, with Trump expected to reveal more details later. The news of a temporary exemption of electronics from the steep US tariffs prompted Asian markets to rise Monday morning. However, gains were capped as Donald Trump warned levies were still likely. Manur Magdum reports from Beijing.
Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index jumped 2.4% today, driven by investor optimism after US President Donald Trump announced a temporary exemption of high import tariffs on certain electronic products, including smartphones and laptops. The move sparked a rally in tech-related stocks. BYD Electronics, a key assembler of iPads, gained nearly 2%. Lenovo's Hong Kong-listed shares soared 8.6%. Despite the upbeat market response, President Trump emphasized that the exemptions are temporary and part of a broader national security review. This statement underscores that while the exemptions may provide short-term relief, tensions between US and China remain unresolved. The market welcomed the policy shift. However, analysts warn that market uncertainty may continue as the geopolitical landscape continues to evolve. Manu Maktoum, A News, Beijing, China.
Chinese President Xi Jinping called for stronger ties with Vietnam on trade and supply chains amid disruption caused by US tariffs. Xi kicked off his Southeast Asian tour in Hanoi, where dozens of agreements were signed. He is set to continue his trip this week by visiting Malaysia and Cambodia.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has begun a high-stakes diplomatic tour in Vietnam, aiming to secure new trade footholds amid mounting tariff tensions with the United States. Xi's arrival in Hanoi marks the first leg of a Southeast Asia trip that includes Malaysia and Cambodia, countries that, like China, are under growing pressure from Washington's protectionist trade stance. Beijing is now grappling with a 145% tariff hike from the US, while Vietnam is negotiating to reduce a looming 46% tariff on its own exports. With supply chains in flux, Xi is seeking deeper regional alliances, and Vietnam is key. On Monday, the two nations signed dozens of cooperation agreements covering production, supply chains, and rail infrastructure. While the deals reflect strategic alignment, financial specifics remain vague. Vietnam, a major export hub to the US, is walking a tightrope, tightening trade controls with China to avoid accusations of tariff circumvention, while also maintaining close economic ties with Beijing. Amid all this, China is pushing for greater acceptance of its domestic aircraft. Vietjet has signed a memorandum with China's COMAC to potentially lease C909 planes, an effort to break into foreign markets. Despite these efforts to deepen ties, challenges persist. Vietnam has recently imposed anti-dumping duties, measures used to protect local industries from unfairly cheap imports on several Chinese steel products. It has also ended a tax waiver on low-value parcels to curb the flow of cheap Chinese goods. Xi's visits to Malaysia and Cambodia later this week will continue China's push to expand regional trade partnerships amid shifting global dynamics.
Japan is facing a demographic crisis with new data showing an unprecedented yearly population decline. Despite efforts to support families and raise the birth rate, the country continues to face serious challenges.
Japan's population is getting smaller and just had its biggest yearly drop on record. As of last October, it fell by 898,000 people compared to the year before, according to Kyodo News. This marks the 14th straight year of population decline based on government estimates. The previous largest drop, 861,000 people, was recorded in July 2024. The country's total population, including foreign residents, stood at 120.3 million, highlighting the growing demographic crisis fueled by an ageing population and falling birth rate. Data from the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications revealed that only Tokyo and nearby Saitama Prefecture saw population growth. This is the most significant population decline since comparable statistics were first collated in 1968. To counter the demographic downturn, Japan's parliament enacted a law in June 2024 designed to boost birth rates. The legislation includes expanded child benefits and improved parental leave policies. Officials have stressed that the period leading up to 2030 is crucial for tackling the issue. Delayed marriages, economic instability, and inadequate support for working parents are frequently cited as key challenges. Japan's fertility rate, the average number of children a woman is expected to have, fell to its lowest point in 2023 since records began in 1947.
Iran and the United States are set to continue their indirect talks over Tehran's nuclear program this Saturday. Our Turaj Shiralilu has more in Tehran.
Iran said on Monday that second round of negotiations between Iranian and US officials will once again be held indirectly and in a third country. Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghai told a weekly press conference here in Tehran that the talks will be held in a third country, but he did not name the country. Unconfirmed reports indicate that after European sides complained that they are sidelined in Iran-US relations, most probably the upcoming negotiations will be held in a European country. And once again, the report said that it will be most probably held in Italy, Rome. The spokesman also said that Mr. Araghchi is scheduled to visit Moscow in coming days before the talks resume, and said that Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has informed his counterparts from regional countries about the discussions held last Saturday in Oman, Muscat, and that all those foreign officials have welcomed adoption of diplomacy in Iran-US relations. Behind me is the entrance to the former US Embassy in Tehran, which was taken over in 1979 by revolutionary students who were opposing the US-Iran relations under the monarchist regime of Shah. Now it remains to be seen whether the negotiations which have just started between Iran and US will lead to reopening of such embassies in Tehran or in Washington, or that Iran and United States will continue the path of 47 years of enmity in which one side have branded the other one the great Satan, and the other one has labeled the other one as an axis of evil. Turaj Shiralilu, reporting for A News TV from US Embassy campus in Tehran.
In the latest developments, the Italian Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani confirmed the nuclear talks will take place in Rome on Saturday. Joining us to discuss this is Michael Perigian, former Pentagon intelligence analyst, coming to us from Washington. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. So let's dive right into it. The Iranian side says that the talks in Rome should define the framework of the negotiations and that the Americans must provide guarantees regarding the lifting of sanctions. We've previously heard the military threats coming out of Washington. Where would you say we are now following the Oman talks, and what do you expect next?
Well, if I was advising the Trump administration, I would remind them that Europe remained in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Europe remained in the Iran deal while Iran was cheating, and at no time did Europe put sanctions on Iran. And at no time did Russia or China put sanctions on Iran for violating the JCPOA that they were still in. So there should be no guarantees for sanctions being lifted. And the first question to Iran would be, or the first demand should be, release all the hostages. Tell Hamas, your proxy, to release all the hostages before we even sit down to talk. Unfortunately, Witkoff is pretty easy. It's pretty naive. So Tehran believes they'll have a better chance once Witkoff gets to Europe and sits around a bunch of people that he believes he wants to impress, and Tehran will get all they want. That is dangerous, and the Trump administration needs to do something about it. They need to remove Witkoff and put Secretary Rubio in there. This is the job for the Secretary of State, not for a businessman who doesn't understand the Middle East, who doesn't understand Russia, and who doesn't understand the art of negotiating with adversaries.
Well, in parallel to these negotiations, a deal is being hammered out between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia to work together on developing the Saudi civil nuclear program. We've seen difficulties in the past surrounding this program, with the Saudis not wanting to sign a deal that would rule out enriching uranium or reprocessing spent fuel, which could both lead to a nuclear bomb. Jeddah has previously said, more specifically Mohammed bin Salman, if Tehran develops a bomb, they will as well. Do you see these two sets of negotiations possibly having an impact on each other?
Well, Iran's, weeks or months away from a nuclear weapon. Saudi Arabia is nowhere near that. They could buy one, I guess, from Pakistan if they wanted to, but they're nowhere near that. So these are two very separate negotiations, and often you'll hear in Washington, D.C., well, what about Saudi Arabia? Instead of addressing Iran. Iran is the threat, Saudi Arabia is an ally. It may be a necessary ally, but Tehran is a dedicated enemy, so the negotiations will be very different. We have to deal with Tehran and its nuclear weapons, their goal of achieving nuclear weapons, so they can provide a nuclear umbrella to their proxy forces in the region. That's the big threat. Saudi Arabia, that's a back burner issue. That's down the road.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
A drug smuggling attempt using a drone has been foiled at the Azerbaijani-Iranian border. Guards in the area say they saw the unmanned aircraft drop a package near the Lankaran section of the border last Tuesday, and that it then returned towards Iran. According to officials, 2 people have been detained and have admitted they were going to collect the package with 4.5 kilograms of marijuana. Authorities say both men have prior criminal records. Small and medium-sized business owners in Armenia have taken to the streets to protest new tax changes they believe will severely impact their businesses. The proposed increase in turnover tax, along with other provisions, has sparked concerns over higher costs and economic setbacks.
Small and medium-sized entrepreneurs in Armenia protested outside the government building against new tax legislation that will increase their tax burden. Over 2,300 signatures were collected to express their objections. The new changes include increasing turnover tax from 5% to 10% for commercial entities and from 3.5% to 7% for production sectors. Additionally, construction, real estate, legal, and accounting firms, as well as businesses exempt from VAT and income taxes, will not benefit from the new tax regime. This law will take effect on the 1st of July.
Today, people have come here from places like Gyumri, despite the snowstorm, leaving all their work behind. The biggest problem is the lack of dialogue. There is only monologue here. The government treat what they say as absolute truth and refuse to engage with the real sector. The authorities are only focused on increasing tax collection, ignoring issues like regional development, social problems, and poverty reduction. I understand that political promises are significant, and that's why the tax burden is increasing. But this is not the way to solve the issue. These measures will have the opposite effect.
The protesters have warned that the tax changes will increase the number of accountants in the shadow economy, raise accounting service costs, and create additional difficulties for entrepreneurs. They have demanded that the changes be postponed until January 2026 and called for a fairer approach to accountants' taxes. Small and medium-sized entrepreneurs plan larger protests if the government refuses dialogue. The protests highlight that the tax changes not only complicate business operations, but also hinder the country's economic development.
Georgia's President Mikhail Kavalishvili is set to make his first official visit abroad to neighboring Azerbaijan this week. Armenia Nikolaishvili has the details in Tbilisi.
Georgia and Azerbaijan are once again underlining their close strategic partnership as Georgian President Mikhail Kavalishvili makes his first official foreign trip to Baku on April 15-16. The trip, confirmed by Georgian Presidential Press Service, highlights the importance both countries place for regional cooperation. Kavalishvili's visit follows a familiar diplomatic pattern, as earlier Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze also selected Baku for his first official trip after Georgia's October parliamentary elections. During the visit, both sides reaffirmed their commitment to peace, stability, and mutual respect. Georgia also expressed gratitude to Azerbaijan for his continued support of Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The visit of Kavalishvili to Baku comes amid Georgia's broader efforts to maintain regional relevance, including its recent participation in Antalya Diplomatic Forum. There, Georgian Foreign Minister Maga Bochorishvili reaffirmed Tbilisi's commitment to regional peace, declaring that stable and secured South Caucasus remains a top strategic priority. Speaking at a high-level panel on regional cooperation, Bochorishvili stated that Georgia is uniquely positioned to facilitate dialogue and peace building in the region. She said both Armenia and Azerbaijan can count on Georgia to support meaningful dialogue. This is Nina Nikolaishvili reporting from Tbilisi, News.
A 6.4 magnitude earthquake has struck Tajikistan. According to the European Mediterranean Seismological Center, the quake struck around 6 a.m. local time on Monday at a depth of 16 kilometers. The epicenter was 156 kilometers northeast of the capital, Dushanbe. Earlier on Sunday, a 6.1 magnitude quake hit and destroyed dozens of houses. A major lithium mining and processing project is being launched in Kazakhstan by a German company. The total investment could reach up to $700 million, and it's part of the EU's broader strategy to reduce reliance on critical raw materials from China. Fariza Kalimurzina reports from Almaty.
Germany's HMS Big Bow AG, in partnership with Kazakhstan's Alatau Lithium and Create the corporation, is set to develop a major lithium mining and processing project in east part of Kazakhstan. Construction is stated to begin in 2026 at 2 key lithium deposits, part of a region that holds 7 sites, according to Kazakhstan's Ministry of Industry. The project represents an investment of up to $700 million, with $500 million already secured. Geological exploration is underway, and the companies have been granted 6-year exploration rights for 2 blocks. This marks the first time a German company has entered Kazakhstan's rare earth mining sector. HMS Bergbo holds a 51% stake in the joint venture following agreements reached during a high-level meeting with Kazakhstan's President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev last year. The project aligns with the European Union's Critical Raw Materials Act, which aims to reduce reliance on Chinese imports by 2030. In turn, Kazakhstan, home to 19 of the 34 rare earths critical to the European Union, is emerging as a key strategic partner. A recent €3 million European Union Central Asia cooperation deal underscores growing interest in the region. With global demand surging, lithium is now seen as a cornerstone of the digital and green economy, vital for electric vehicles, smartphones, and more. Fariza Kalimurzana, A News, in Almaty, Kazakhstan.
Now over to Afghanistan. The country is grappling with a growing urban crisis as nearly 80% of Kabul residents live in inadequate housing, vulnerable to climate extremes and lacking basic services, according to the United Nations. Our Tamim Bahiz reports from Kabul.
Nearly 80% of Kabul's residents live in informal or inadequate housing, according to the UN Habitat, which has raised concerns about the heightened risks these communities face from extreme weather and climate-related disasters. In a statement posted on X, UN Habitat highlighted that over 40% of Afghanistan's urban population is concentrated in Kabul, a figure that underscores the capital's significant housing and infrastructure deficits. Many of Kabul's informal settlements lack essential services and resilient infrastructure, leaving residents increasingly exposed to the impacts of climate change. The agency called for urgent, targeted climate interventions and greater international support to protect vulnerable communities in Afghanistan's rapidly expanding urban centers. Meanwhile, Afghanistan is seeking ways to improve the livelihoods of its citizens. The country's Minister of Agriculture, Irrigation and Livestock recently met with Uzbekistan's Minister of Water and Energy to discuss cooperation on irrigation development, water resource management and climate change. Uzbekistan, which is home to one of the largest irrigation systems in Central Asia, pledged support for modernizing Afghanistan's irrigation infrastructure, particularly through drip and rainwater irrigation technologies. However, after more than 4 decades of conflict, the scale of Afghanistan's needs remains immense. Rebuilding its agriculture sector and ensuring climate resilience will require sustained international cooperation, long-term investment and a stable environment to protect, to implement and maintain essential infrastructures. This is Tamim Bahiz in Kabul for A News.
Well, that's all we have for you for now. Thank you kindly for watching and do stay tuned to A News.